Last month is gone, and now we are in a new month. Today, I'm going to be giving you my February wrap-up and my March TBR. Hi, I'm Lisa. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. Today, I'm going to share my February wrap-up and my March TBR. And the reason why I'm doing this instead of separating them is because, as I've said in my last TBR video, I am not a fast reader. I don't read that many books in a month. In fact, I've only managed to get 4 read for February. And as I've also explained before, I always start out with 4 for my TBR. And then any subsequent book I just pick after I'm done with the 4th one. So, first, let's get to our wrap-up. The first book I read in February was Wrong Text, Right Love by Claudia Bagoa. I hope I'm saying that right. This follows Ford and Percy. Percy does social media and is in the process of writing a book. She is also a podcaster, a therapist, and a sexologist. And her publisher is demanding, because Percy had recently broken up with someone, but her publisher is demanding that she date somebody else for the sake of image, the sake of appearances, which Percy is not game for. Ford is the CEO of a tech company and is wealthy. And Ford owns an apartment complex and has sold half of it to one of his brothers who is never there. Percy's friend and agent direct her to a room in that half of the complex. And that's how our couple meets. And they don't get along at all at first. Ford has really sour attitudes towards relationships. He wants a relationship to be for one thing and one thing only, and not something as messy or complicated as a romantic relationship. Percy, on the other hand, has a very different philosophy on relationships. And she does her podcasts, and every time she starts doing her podcast, Ford comes in and interrupts her. They have an adjoining door, and their terrace is split by a gate. So anytime she starts her podcast, he walks in and gives her his 2 cents on what she's talking about. And ultimately, she lets him record his opinions and beliefs on relationships. Ultimately, they start to develop feelings for each other. And this was a pretty well-paced novel. I enjoyed it. I sensed the chemistry from beginning to end, even though I didn't like the hero at first. Ultimately, as he started to soften up towards Percy, he grew on me, and I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was Beguiled by Shannon Drake, and this is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. This follows Mark and Allie. Mark is, I can't remember if he's a earl or a duke or something like that, but he's part of the peerage. But he also goes undercover as a highwayman along with his friends, because there are murders going around, and he is trying to find out who committed the murders, because the murderer gets away in a coach. And Allie is going to a ball, and Mark stops her coach. She, of course, protests, but he tells her a thing or two. She tells him a thing or two. At first, when he asks her name, she won't tell him, because, of course, she's got no reason to trust him. But when she finally does tell him, he takes her back to her coach and sends her on her way. Turns out that Allie is Mark's betrothed. Only Allie doesn't know she's betrothed to anyone. She doesn't find out until the following night at a gathering where her betrothal is announced. Yeah. Allie was raised by 3 elderly women in a cottage in the woods that she calls her aunts, and she has no idea where she came from or anything, or why somebody who is a peer would be betrothed to her. That is one of the mysteries they are trying to unravel. There is also political unrest. There are murders going on, and there are people blaming the monarchy for it. But Allie is secretly writing articles in the paper supporting the monarchy, and Mark is trying to get her to stop because he knows that doing so puts a target on her back. But this was so good. Great chemistry, fast pace. This book is over 400 pages with only 18 chapters, I believe. No, 14. Let me see. 18 chapters. And I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to hang with a book formatted that way because I'm not a fan of long chapters, but these chapters all kept me engaged and I really enjoyed the story and I gave it 4.5 stars. My highest rated book of the month was The Duke She Married by Jesse Cleaver. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling that is so beautifully written, so angsty, so heartbreaking. Lucas was married once, but his wife had died in the fire. That same fire that had scarred and burned him really bad from his face, down his side. And he's been reclusive ever since, living in the dark, but he needs an heir. So he purchases our heroine Amelia to be his wife. And once she arrives at his estate, they have them marry immediately. And even though she wasn't all for what was going on, she's also bewildered that her husband hasn't come in that night so that they can consummate their marriage. And Amelia was raised in a family that told her she was never good enough. So she has very, very low self-esteem. And anytime something happens that seems to disturb Lucas, she blames herself. But Lucas was traumatized by the experience. There are things about the fire and his marriage that I'm not going to get into because they're spoilers. But Luke was traumatized by the experience. Every time he tries to make love with Amelia, he ends up not allowing his seed to go in her, spilling it outside instead because he can't trust, he can't get himself to impregnate his own wife because of his experiences. I did put a trigger warning on my review for PTSD because of this. But ultimately, he slowly learns to trust, and she slowly learns to stand up for herself and tell him, if you're not going to let me do this, and you're not going to give me a child, I don't see the purpose of me being here. But her feeling is, what am I doing? What am I doing wrong? But this was so good, so moving. I loved it, and I gave it 5 stars. And the last book I read for February is Seduce Me at Sunrise by Lisa Kleypas. And Lisa Kleypas, her writing is just beautiful. This was an intense story between Kev and Win. We meet them and see the bond between them in the first book, Mine Till Midnight. And in this book, Win has gone to France to get the therapy she needed to regain her strength. As if you recall from Mine Till Midnight, she was really weakened, really, really bad from scarlet fever, and could hardly do anything without putting too much of a strain on her body. Once she returns with her doctor, who seems to have an interest in her, but she is trying to get Kev to not be afraid of hurting her, to learn to trust himself, because the way that Kev was raised before the Hathaways found him made him believe that he was born to hurt people. And he doesn't want to do that to Win, but at the same time, he doesn't want anybody else near her, which kind of irked me, but given the way that he was raised and the the beliefs that the Romani had, at least according to the series, I can understand why it was so hard for him. But ultimately, as they get closer and he finally decides that he's going to stop running and claim her, is just beautiful. I really enjoyed this, and I am really looking forward to getting to the next book, and I gave this 4.5 stars. The books that I chose for March, my TBR jar pick for March is The Kingmaker by Kennedy Ryan. My spinner prompt was Foiled Cover, so I decided to read Ransom by Julie Garwood. I loved The Secret. I read The Secret a few years ago. It was one of the earlier books I read when I was getting back into romance. But I put off reading this because it's a chunker. It's a big book. But I'm going to read it in March. So I have heard so many good things about this. Then I picked 2 mood reads. One is Romancing the Duke by Tessa Dare. I read When Scott Ties the Knot a few years ago as well, and it was one of my earlier books from when I was getting back into romance. And I can hardly wait to get into Romancing the Duke. I ended up buying this on sale, and I am really looking forward to it. I hate this cover, though. Hate it. I love the original cover. It's gorgeous, but this, why? And then the 4th book I chose for March is The Girl He Used to Know by Tracy Garvis Graves. I've heard good things about this and about this author. This is one of the first books that I purchased when I decided to go back into reading and reading romance again. I believe this is a second chance romance, but I will give my thoughts and